Welcome to Better Bazaar Builds, and today's topic is a new villain of the Bazaar, the Dually Ray build. Dually has taken over the meta for the last week or so, and his most prominent build is various flavors of the Ray build. Let's start with a quick description of the 4 Rays: the Weapon Alpha Ray, the Freeze Beta Ray, the Poison Gamma Ray, and the Burn Omega Ray. Each ray has an effect, but the most important part is that each ray has a scaling effect that is procced by other rays and the core as well. This makes the rays particularly good with items that proc often and have low damage numbers. But before we discuss rays further, let's talk about the villains of Ye Olde, that being Vanessa. Poor was kneecapped hard, generating lower tier items, fewer frost potions, and the strongest defenders of throwing knives and repeater being nerfed as well. Pufferfish was nerfed, but ironically became more broken before being disabled entirely. Astrolabe got hit by minor nerfs as well, so if you recall from our last video with the Weatherglass trifecta, all 3 core pieces of the puzzle got some well-deserved nerfs. In addition, Vanessa as a whole became weaker, with her strong start of run skills being removed. So with the nerfs hitting Vanessa hard and pick somewhat, Dually has become top dog. While rays have always been an item, they haven't seen any success until recently. First, the core cooldown was lowered, but the core effects decreased. But for ray builds, they only care about how frequently the core casts and usually don't care about what the core does specifically. Next, overall damage, especially early on, has gone down with many items getting nerfed and starting skills getting removed. This means that ramping builds like rays become stronger. Most importantly though, the rays are now able to be found in bronze tier, significantly increasing the consistency that you're able to get the rays that you want. On that note, let's talk about consistency. With the way the game works, it's difficult to guarantee wins in both the early game before you're able to put a build together, and difficult to guarantee wins in the late game, where opponents start buying insta-win skills that have no counterplay. So the only time where wins can be guaranteed is in the mid game, where you can consistently put together a build, scoop some wins, and maybe get any additional wins on top of that. The good news is that the Ray build spikes in the mid game and can almost guarantee 4 wins. Let's talk about the minimal example that still allows you to climb. Let's say you're able to put together 4 rays 90% of the time, or at least the rays that you want, and given the rays that you want, you're able to put together 4 wins 90% of the time. That means you get 4 wins and at least hold your rank 80% of the games that you play. After you've secured 4 wins, let's say 25% of those make it to 7 wins, which cancels out the 20% of games where you don't get 4 wins. And lastly, out of the 7 win games, let's say 10% of them make it to 10 wins. In reality, all these percentages are probably much higher. Putting together the rays that you want is almost guaranteed now that they appear in bronze, and the rays are so strong in the mid game that you should be getting 4 wins every time. But even these pessimistic assumptions are enough to have you climb, albeit slowly. And the reason why this can work is that this build is so forcible regardless of the start of the core that you get as Dually. I'm not advocating to do so, but you could ostensibly play rays every game and climb consistently, at least right now. Now that we know why rays are popular, let's talk about why they're so strong. In a well-balanced meta, we have a presence of all types of builds. Both fast decks that have higher flat numbers and front-loaded damage, and slow decks that focus on ramping up numbers through the course of the fight. The meta is balanced because fast damage decks beat both slow offense and slow defense. But there can't be too many fast damage decks or more people will play fast defense decks. Meanwhile, fast defense decks can't outlast or put enough early pressure on either version of the slow deck. Of course, most decks will have an element of both offense and defense, and these are broad groupings of the types of boards that can exist, but this is generally how the meta should work. But when this diagram breaks, the meta can be dominated by whichever of these builds disrupts the typical matchups. Flashy reload and daggers with pre-nerf throwing knives dealt so much upfront damage that it ran over even fast upfront shield builds, and it never ran out of ammo to be outscaled during the round. Similarly, Dually's Ray build right now is strong because it outpaces any scaling defense builds, especially because it scales both burn and poison, so it is impossible to defend with just armor. And the biggest predator of slow offense builds, such as throwing knives, have just been nerfed, and even when they are played, often lose the damage race against rays. And of course, rays beat fast defense decks that can neither apply pressure or outpace the ray scaling. Now, let's talk about how to actually play rays. The good news for everyone currently hard stuck is that rays are probably the easiest build to play. So the basic strategy for the build simply involves getting the core to cast faster. Include your core in rays, Include some fast items like First Aiden to proc the core quickly. Include some support like LEDs, since you want your core to be casting frequently anyways. And include a source of damage that scales with arrays. Even though the rays work with each other, you're not forced to include all of them. The only auto-include is actually the freeze ray, as it casts the most often due to its charging ability. It also is absolutely key in the ray versus ray mirror, since freezing the other opponent's rays is round deciding. For damage, the best weapons are ones that get buffed by both the weapon and burn ray, such as rocket launcher and flamethrower. So in that build, you can choose to not include the poison ray. You can also have a poison ray build with just a poison ray, freeze ray, and monitor lizard as a source of haste. Lastly, Elusiray now officially counts as a ray, which seems minor until you realize that Elusiray can 3x multicast, proccing every other ray buff 3 times. I recently hit Diamond with about half my games featuring rays. The final game to get me there was a ray game with Companion Core, which got replaced by Oven Mitts later on to chain haste with Fiery Monitor Lizard and an Elusiray to buff the rays. Another cool strategy with rays is to run them with Combat Core, since the Combat Core also counts as a core for the purpose of proccing the rays. So overall, the ray build is one of the most popular builds and quite strong. I wouldn't say it's the most fun build to play, like Weatherglass was, but it's at least necessary to know how it works to perform against it in this meta, which we'll talk about in the next video. This has been Porpoise, and until next time, build better.